All right, today we're going to talk about the 8 principles of art. So, first off, what are the principles of art? The principles are like the rules of art. Before we talked about the elements and we said they were like the ingredients or the building blocks. Well, we can take that analogy further. And if we have ingredients, we also follow a recipe. So the principles are kind of like a recipe that tell us how to utilize those elements in different amounts. We also said that the elements are like building blocks. If that analogy is true, then the principles would be like the instructions that come with the blocks that tell you how to assemble the different blocks together. So, to summarize, the principles are like the rules, they're like the recipe, or the instructions. We can break these concepts down into 8 distinct principles that could be summarized with the word verbska. The first principle we're going to look at is emphasis. Emphasis refers to developing points of interest to pull the viewer's eye to important parts of the work. We sometimes call these focal points. Think of these focal points as targets for our eyes. There's a lot of different ways that we can pull the viewer's eye to specific spots. Some of it is through detail and texture, or sometimes it can be de-emphasis. Look at this picture of a flower. There's a clear focal point here. Notice how the detail emphasizes the most important part of the flower, whereas the background detail that's less important has been de-emphasized by being blurred. One of the best ways to create emphasis is through contrast. Here we have another strong example of emphasis. The dark void in the middle is surrounded by a light ring of flowers. This creates contrast, which creates emphasis. The next 2 principles work in tandem with each other, so we're going to look at them both. The first is variety. Variety combines contrasting elements in a work of art to stress slight differences of separate yet related parts. Next is unity. Unity is when all parts work together as a whole. Variety and unity build off of one another. I like to describe them as 2 sides of the same coin. Variety tends to stress differences between elements. These differences produce interest. However, if there's too much variety and too many differences, it produces chaos, which is not a good thing. Unity, on the other hand, stresses similarities, and similarities create understanding, which is also a good thing. But just like with variety, too much of a good thing can be a bad thing, because too much unity is boring. So really what we're trying to do is strike a balance between unity and variety. This we call harmony. Consider these colored pencil works by C.J. Hendry. Notice how there's both variety of color, but also unity of color. Variety of texture, as well as unity of texture. Variety of shape, as well as unity of shape. Together, these create a harmonious design. The next principle we're going to look at is rhythm. Rhythm is a type of movement made through repetition. When you repeat elements, you create a visual beat or tempo. Sometimes you hear rhythm referred to as the flow of the piece. Either way, rhythm has a timing component to it. So one way to think of rhythm as the speed at which our eye moves through the piece. Number 5, balance. Balance is the arrangement of elements in a work to create a sense of stability, the feeling of equal weight. There are 3 kinds of balance. The first is symmetrical, or the same on both sides. Here, there's a clear line of symmetry running vertically down the center of this painting. The second form of balance is asymmetrical, meaning not the same on both sides. There are many different ways to accomplish this type of balance. The third kind of balance is radial, emanating out from the center around a circle. Think of a mandala or stained glass window effect. Connected with balance, there are a few compositional rules that I want you to be aware of. The first is called the rule of thirds. Many of us by default put the main subject matter right in the middle, but the rule of thirds encourages us to divide the picture plane into thirds horizontally as well as vertically. This creates almost like a tic-tac-toe pattern. Now, if we put our subject matter along these lines of interest, compositionally, we should come up with something more interesting. So instead of putting the sunset right in the middle, let's put the horizon line at the top third and the sunset in the top left third. The only thing that is different in this example is that the rule of thirds has been applied in cropping this photo. The right picture is more interesting to look at because of the rule of thirds. The second compositional rule is known as the rule of odds. This states that 3 objects is better than 2 and 5 objects is better than 4. You can see here that with similar compositions, the one with 3 looks better than the one with 2. Also, the one with 5 objects looks better than a similar composition with only 4 objects. The next principle is movement. Movement is the illusion of action. It's the path that our eye moves through the piece. One of the best ways to create movement is through the use of lines. When we're using movement, we want to create movement triangles. Some triangles can be stable, others can be unstable. Stable triangles are peaceful and calming, like this scene of women bathing a child. Unstable triangles, however, produce action and tension, like this painting by Caravaggio depicting John the Baptist's head decapitated on a tray. It's easy to confuse movement and rhythm, but if you think of movement as the path for our eyes, if there's a car driving on a road, the path would be movement, whereas the speed at which the car is traveling would be rhythm. Our 7th principle is scale and proportion. Scale and proportion refers to the relationship of the size of objects within a work of art. If I draw 2 identical houses, those houses have similar proportions, but as soon as I start to add on windows and doors, those windows and doors tell us something about the proportions of those houses. For example, if I make the doors and windows smaller, it feels much grander, whereas if I keep them big, it feels like a playhouse. I could then add even more things, like this mushroom, to make this grand cathedral feel small again. Scale and proportion works best when you subvert expectations. For example, presenting something big on a small scale, like this piece here. Or doing the opposite. You can show something that is small on a large scale, like this clothespin. Instead of pinching cloth, this clothespin is actually pinching the earth. There's often a playfulness that comes with proportion and scale. Our last principle is contrast. Contrast is the juxtaposition of elements in a work of art. Juxtaposition is simply a fancy word that means opposites in proximity. In other words, opposites next to each other. These contrasting elements produce visual drama, and we as humans are drawn into drama. Producers of shows like The Bachelor or The Real Housewives know this all too well. This is why one of the best ways to create emphasis is to use contrast. Remember, opposites next to one another. Think dark or light, maybe bumpy or smooth. This will create emphasis. So, there you have it. There are 8 principles of design. These are the rules. They are the recipe the instructions or the blueprints that we follow as we use the elements, which are the ingredients or the building blocks to create the art. These serve as the guide as we think about art creation. Hope this helps. Thanks for watching.